Welcome to the last session of the second stage of our air quality community of practice as part of the CanAIRy Alert program, supported by the Clean Air Fund. We are more than delighted to have you for this one last session before heading to the next section that we are going to discuss later. You already know me a little better. I am Christine Muthee from WRI Africa. We have taken a look at the data QA/QC protocols in the first session. We went on to look at developing a quality forecast within cities and going through the opportunities and challenges, as well as having cities share their experiences and the technical teams and experts that carry out different work. Now we will close this phase by exploring one of our most comprehensive and complex tools of air quality management, that is the development of an emissions inventory. In this tech talk, we want to learn from cities that use the emissions inventory, as well as all of their key roles of these emissions inventory in these cities. We want to share the learnings and experiences of cities that have developed these tools and methodologies of integrated high resolution emissions inventory. And also we want to engage cities on the approaches and the challenges of developing systematic and sustainable emissions inventory, relevant to their local context. We know there is no one size fits all, so we understand that it is different for each cities. We want to have that experience sharing. And to achieve this, we will first explore India's experience with the development of the high resolution bottom-up emissions inventory for Surat and Indore. And then the head of WRI Africa, George Mwaniki, will moderate a brief space for questions to our experts that we have lined up for you. In the second part of this meeting, also, as I had mentioned, Dr. Mwaniki will help us to moderate the local experiences through a discussion panel, just for us to shed light on emissions, and we'll explore the systematic development of emissions inventory that have been done or that are already being done by different cities. We have multiple experts with experience in technical issues, analysis, research, and directory within us. And they're joining us from Nairobi. We have a lot of experience from South Africa, Guadalajara, Mexico City, and Bogota. So we expect to have a great overview of the work within these cities. Let's now get to business with our main speaker, our keynote, who is the Associate Professional Specialist at Princeton University, Dr. Ajay Nakpure. He will explore the development of the high-resolution bottom-up emissions inventory in two Indian cities, Surat and Indore. He will talk about the methodologies, the tools, and technologies, the data sources, the best practices and challenges in construction emissions inventory.
Thank you so much for the invitation. And today I would like to present I think two sets of slides. One is about the developing the emission inventory, and another is about like how we can utilize these emission inventories for betterment of the city, or like that if he really wants to just that how we can utilize those cities for the the policy development, policy formulation, as well as that assessment of the policies. So I'll start. What is air pollution? So I'm going to skip this slide. So, but this is a picture of Delhi. That mostly in a winter time you will see this kind of pictures, and mostly in the media. And kids and the majority of the population suffers from air pollution. And I was in Delhi before, I think 6 months back, and why I moved to United States, because of that my son is having some allergy because of the air pollution, both my son and daughter. So that is the level of air pollution, so that I had to move to United States. So when it comes to the what is the situation of air pollution in India? So that air pollution is the third largest risk factors for premature mortalities in India, after the dietary risk and high blood pressure. And approximately 1.6 million people dying because of this air pollution. So, that we all aware about these numbers. But when it comes to the city, so majority of the time, because city has its reputation, a city or the country has its reputation, political reputation, and so many other things in a global forum. So majority of the time, they, especially developing nations, they deny these kind of numbers. They say, oh, these methods are based on the developed nation, or adding a methodology issue or something like that. So sometimes they do not believe on these numbers. So whenever I present air pollution related data in an Indian city, especially to the Indian bureaucrats and the politician, so I used to share this figure. This is the data from 3 hospitals in Delhi, where I think where they found out that in outpatient section of the respiratory ward, the air pollution, I know that the respiratory patient have been increased 300% between 2005 and 2015, and majority of them are children. So the importance of these data is because these are the local data. These are the that they're hospital data. So they sometimes that because they have to believe on these data. They can deny this global estimation or something like that. So if it is not available, the data is not available, we can definitely use the global data. But if there is some city specific data available, always try to present data to these type of data to the city people, politicians. So it would, I think, affect them more, that they can realize the situation on the ground. Another important thing is that majority of the time, that as a air pollution researchers, so we think like, that we have our own world. So for example, we talk in this way, like air pollution, PM 2.5, SOx, NOx, something like that. But if you go to any city engineer, even a city engineer or any senior officer in a city, if you ask some basic question or just try to you'll find out that they are not aware about these terminologies, PM 2.5, carbon monoxide, NOx, or something like that. And that is quite natural because they don't have exposure, they have a different their expertise in the different subject. So in that case, but they are aware about their sectoral activities. For example, when we talk about the transportation, so transportation, if we say, oh, transportation is responsible for this much of PM 2.5 emission in your city, they'll say, okay, but you'll say that this many vehicles in your city are old age and they are traveling this much kilometer, and because of that it's happening. So always try to that present with the activities, and then come to your analysis, so they can better understand the situation. Otherwise, majority of the time they ignore, so it's very important. So we develop an emission inventory for Surat and Indore when I was in WRI. Now currently I'm also advising WRI. But I think I'm in this area from last 15 years. Right now, I'm developing a high resolution emission inventory for India at the ward. That city is divided into different blocks or the ward and village level. Ward and village level for entire India. That is temporal, that time wise, like what is the emissions in a 24 hours, 30 days, and 12 months. So that kind of analysis I'm doing. And that is, that it's not necessary that you have to collect all data on ground. There are a lot of data available. If you explore the data, you'll find out there are different ways that we can generate the emission inventory and activity pattern for the city or in any administrative area. And so when I started doing emission inventory, so what I did, I first identified the major sectors. So in India, the major sectors are, transportation, industry, household cooking, waste burning, construction, then the crop burning. So these are the major sectors. But that if you are developing emission inventory, then after that, after identifying these sectors, you need to understand what is the level of uncertainty in different sectors. So majority of the time you'll find out that emission inventory is good for, at least I think, better than other sector, for the transportation sector. That is because transportation is one of the important sector in any city or any region. So you'll find out at least somewhat better data than other sectors. You'll find out there are some sectors which are highly uncertain. It's an industry, waste burning, construction, and the crop burning. Household is also better because that there are different organizations, they are collecting data for household sector. Like a census is providing, or that global surveys like the World Health Organization, or this National Family Health Survey. So each country has the National Family Health Survey data. And the WHO, or I think I need to find out which organization, they have the depository of all world countries' data in their database. So I think I have that access of that data. So if you want like a data for a particular country, I think please let me know. Then I'll try to find out those kind of data for you. It's the National Family Health Survey. It survey the household cooking fuel use and different other variables. So I'll skip this. In 2019, the government of India has developed this National Clean Air Program, and this, according to this program, each city, I think they identify about 132 cities in India, and they said that these cities has to develop a clean air action plan. And we were responsible for developing a clean air action plan for a Surat city. And we develop a clean air action plan, not only develop a clean air action plan, but I think we showed that how to implement policies on the ground. And we had a very positive result, which I'm going to show you in the next presentation. So I'll just skip this. So after identifying these sectors, these are the sectors we have identified for the each, like a Surat city, and even for the Indore city. And then first we went for the industry. And I can tell you that industry is the most uncertain sector in any city of the world. Why? Because majority of the time we do not have the proper information about the industries. We may have some information about the large industries, which are which are visible in a database or visible in a different ways. So we do have some data about these type of industry, but especially in India, there are a lot of unrecognized informal activities, industrial activities, which is, I think there is no record for those kind of things. Even for the formal industry, you will not find out this information. So what is so there are two ways like we can develop emission inventory for industry. There are two ways like we can identify the activity patterns on these industries. The first is that like we'll try to find out the government data, like a pollution control board or some other regulatory data. That's one way. Another way would be the census data. So census data is providing the employment data, that employment by the different industrial codes, or even some surveys like that they are providing some industrial codes. So whenever you get the data from the particular sector, that particular organization, try to validate those data with the the employment data which you have for a city or region. Of course, there would be uncertainty, but if uncertainty is more than 40% or 50%, I think then you can say that there are some issue with the data. So what I did, I think I just went for, there are in India, I think fortunately nowadays, I think databases are very good. For example, we have a national economic census. So there are different types of census. So when you are studying the data, I think you must aware about the all type of surveys done by your country and the international organization. So I'm keep tracking, because from last 15 years, I'm keep tracking the different types of survey and census. So India has a different census. For example, one is the population census. Another is economic census. Third is animal census, livestock census. So there are different census data. So economic census is providing each and every activities at the ward level. Ward means the smallest unit, administrative unit of the city. And there are other surveys called the annual survey of industry. So annual survey, and each country has this kind of data. So annual survey of industry is providing the input and output survey for the each type of industry. That how much they are producing, what is the fuel or something like that. So I got this economic census data, Census of India, annual survey of industry, and these data I got it at the ward level. So this is the Surat city, So this is the Surat city of India, where I did this our first clean action plan. So we have developed a clean action plan for that city. So these are the ward boundaries. So we were able to find out the number of that economic entities, any type of entities. That could be eatery, that could be small manufacturing, large manufacturing, or the any kind of commercial activities. So we were able to map at this level. Then we just classified those entities into different manufacturing or something like that. And there is a code. It's called the National Industrial Code. So each country is having this national industrial codes. So these codes are, different levels. Like, that sometimes at the national level, you'll find out the 2-digit code, 3-digit code, 4, 5-digit codes. So in each code, like for example, if you have 5-digit code information for the industry or the national activities, so then it is very easy to identify and classify the types of activities you are having in your city. If it is 4-digit, 3-digit, so there are different, so it is available for almost all countries in a different ways. But only thing is that we need to find out where we can find out these information. Another thing is the household cooking. Household cooking information is available in Census of India data, census data. Most of the countries, majority of the countries, they ask for this data. What is the cooking fuel? What is the cooking fuel and the lighting information? So, and also there are some data is available in the that surveys, like as I said, a National Family Health Survey. So National Family Health Survey is done by each and every country, whether it's African countries or that South American country or South Asian countries or Asian countries. Each country has a National Family Health Survey, and there is a one World Bank database where you can find out all these surveys. Another important thing, there are sometimes the census, the census is too old. For example, currently India is using 2011 census. So in that case, what you can do, you can simply use the Census of India, census data and projected population, and apply these survey data to assess the the current situation of the household cooking fuel use. So this is how you can do that. So I think we use, fortunately, we were having all this information at the ward level. So we were able to use, that identify the household percentage of the household using different types of fuel, access. So at the ward level and the village level. Another important thing is the access and the consumption. Both are different things. The census and the survey data is providing the access. But for the consumption, what we have to do, we have to find out the National Household Consumption Expenditure Survey. So majority of the country are doing, and this is not for the environmental purpose or any other purpose, to assess the poverty, to assess the economic pattern and the country. They try to ask how different household, what is the consumer expenditure in a different region. So majority of the countries has this household expenditure survey. So in the household expenditure survey, you'll find out the energy consumption per capita. So by combining the Census of India, of census data, and any survey data which provide the access and the consumption which is provided by the household expenditure survey or some kind of survey, you would be able to do this kind of assess the consumption at the ward and village level or any administrative level. Sometime you have the old household expenditure survey data and there are some small survey data, so you can combine both the data to validate your information. And I think this household consumption is mostly same, if they are using household cooking, firewood or some other biomass. So mostly same because the food pattern is almost same. We have not changed a lot of food patterns, that whatever we are eating in home, I think it's almost same. So that's why I think I would say this is the most easiest sector to estimate the air pollution. And so I think we have plotted this kerosene consumption, and another important thing is that how you can validate these data. So for example, you have a ward level consumption, then you may have to aggregate those data for a city and just go to your municipal corporation or municipality or city administrative and ask them what is the level of how much LPG or other fuels you are consuming. At least they have record for the LPG and kerosene, and then you can just compare the aggregated consumption and the total consumption by the city. So then you can see that the level of uncertainty in results. So this is how you can validate the data for any region, or if you don't have for your city, then you can do it for the country or something like that. So in that way, if you are presenting your results, so you can say, no, I think we have compiled the data, but we have also validated. And somehow I think we have at this stage, I think majority of the country have some kind of data. So I think this is one of the easiest sector. And I think another important thing is that that sometimes we try to assess the emissions, but if we want to assess the concentration inside the household, so what we are doing, we are generally using this sensor data or something like that, but sometimes we do not have this census data. So there is one model in I think 2013 there is a paper called that household concentration estimation for Indian states. It's developed by Balakrishnan et al. And they have developed a very that semi-empirical model. So you only need to provide not in the consumption, only what is the type of fuel they are using, type of fuel excess, and the ventilation level, whether the ventilation is good or bad, how much time they're cooking. So in that way, you will get approximate concentration within a kitchen area or living area. So this is a very useful model, and you can just see that paper and you will find out that this is very useful. It's of course I think the monitoring is the most important, but if monitoring is not available, then we can use that model to at least provide some kind of information at the household level concentration. That is very useful model. Another sector is transportation. So whenever you are developing a transportation emission inventory, first thing is that you need to identify the types of vehicles they are using. So in many countries, we do not have that enough information about the on-road vehicles. Sometimes we only, so for example, in India, we only have the registered vehicle population. So registered vehicle population means like we have old vehicle population because city has very old registration system. Now things are improving, but at least, so if we have registered vehicle population, we can use the that phasing out age of the vehicle, like what is the phasing out age of the vehicle. And when I was doing my PhD, that time I developed it's called WRI model. So in that model, I think you just simply put the age in the registered vehicle in the particular year. So you'll find out the total on-road vehicles. So that is very useful model. And this data is mostly provided by the RTO office. And another important thing is the mode share. So mode share data you'll find out in the census. Census sometimes provide the data like how people are traveling. So this data it's also very important. So And another important thing is that because that mode share, we have the mode share and the vehicle population data from the census or some local connection or city. But what about the vehicle mileage travel, the vehicle kilometer travel or vehicle miles travel? So I think sometimes we do survey, that is the best technique. But if the survey is not available, we do not have the capacity to conduct the survey, so then what we can do? We can simply use the household expenditure survey. So because in household expenditure survey, they sometimes collect the vehicle ownership, like a type of vehicle they are using, how much expenditure they are doing for a travel purpose, for like a petrol, like a gasoline purchase, diesel purchase. So they have those information in the household expenditure survey. So we can simply use that expenditure, rupees, or the whatever currency you have, dollar or something like that, and just you can convert that like a approximate two-wheeler mileage or car mileage, and just you can by using money. So you'll at least get the household level VKT information, like vehicle types of vehicle, that how much different socioeconomic groups or the average population is traveling. So that is very useful data. So as I said, the data is available. We need to explore. For example, sometimes many times we say, oh, we don't have the data. We don't have the capacity to conduct the survey on ground. So it's very difficult. But I think if you want, some way we can get some way. And there are government level, there is a lot of information is available. I believe, and I found out in a majority of the countries all over the world. So when I was doing the emission inventory for the household, the transportation sector, so we were able to map this level of information: number of two-wheeler per 1,000 population in the ward and village level. Total number of two-wheelers, like this is a city, you can see that higher concentration within a city. But there are some villages where you can see that two-wheeler concentration is higher. So this is how we can get the information. And also like trips, what types of trip they are using. So, and as I said, like I developed a model when I was doing my PhD. So in that I developed this WRI model, vehicular air pollution inventory model. It's a very simple model. And why I developed this model? Because when I was doing my PhD at that time, I realized that I think most of the developing nation, they are using the models from the developed nation, like a corporate, IV, mobile, all these kind of models. But those models are based on a very sophisticated information. And we like in developing nation in 2011, 10, we do not need that kind of. We did not need that kind of level. We at least want some kind of sense. So so I developed this model, and by using this information, I think this because by using this exhaust evaporative emissions, so I think this model we were able to assess because when we are doing a transportation emission inventory, we need to understand that what is the exhaust emission, non-exhaust emission, the road dust emission is very important. So this is how this model is useful. So you can find out these information. Last, I'll just use this construction emission inventory. So for the construction emission inventory, what you have to do, you have to, for example, you have the census data. So if you have old census and new census, so you can just simply compare both census at the ward level or the city level. You'll find out the new household, number of new households. And there is another survey that generally we have, this housing sanitation survey. So that survey provides the approximate household square footage area. So by using these kind of survey, I would say you can use the emission, develop emission activities, and emission inventory is very after that. If you have activities, then you can easily estimate the emission by multiplying it with the emission factor. Last, sorry for the time. The last, I think another important thing is, especially if for a developing nation, we do not have the enough information about the waste management or the waste burning. So for this, I developed a model method. It's called the transit method. So in this transit method, you need to just simply walk on the city road and street, and record the number of burning incidents in the both sides of the road at the different neighborhoods level. And we did this for a Surat city, and we were able to identify the waste burning hotspots in the different types of the neighborhoods, and we were able to estimate the waste burning. So this is how we develop the emission inventory. I'll stop here, and I have a lot to present.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ajay. It's indeed a rich concept that you shared with us. So I would give this to George normally to just go ahead and review the Q&A. So George, kindly tell me whether we have.
Thank you, Ajay, for such an elaborate presentation. It does seem that putting these emissions inventories together, you need to pull data from various sources. And sometimes we in the developing world, sometimes you don't know who has done what research, which data is where. I would just want to know some of your approaches on how you are able to know which reports are where and how to engage those different stakeholders.
So I think, that because sometimes I feel because it's very hard to get the data from the government. That's quite sure, because you have to follow up with the government and that officers or something, and it's sometimes delayed. And I feel that if you want some data from the government, I think it's better to do some homework first. At least some homework for some sectors. What happened majority of the time, that we try to get the data, that we say that, oh, we want transportation data from your city or something like that, and we have not done any homework. And so then when we go to them, and they'll give us some data to us, then after that we'll explore the data, and then we will we'll reconnect with them, and we'll say, oh, this data is having these issues. So sometimes that those officers, they say, oh, I think they are just coming again. So before going to any stakeholders or any officers for data collection, I would strongly suggest that first explore like what is the different levels of data, what kind of data we want, and make it a detailed, these are the data we want. And whenever you are just trying to just draft a letter, be specific. Otherwise, they have different sets of data. They'll simply give one set of data and say, oh, we have given the data. Even their officer will ask, oh, did you share the data with them? They'll say, oh, yes, we did. So we have to be very, rational and very, I think we have to do a lot of analysis before going to the stakeholders.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ajay and Dr. Mohineki. So we are going to quickly shift gears to the city experiences and shed light on what we already have within our cities. And George will help us explore that work within cities by speaking to our experts, and we can get to just interact with them more. So we have Seneca Naido, who is with us as the regional technical advisor for air quality from C40 cities. So there's the global network supports nearly 100 mayors of the world's major cities by raising the climate ambition of the 1.5 Climate Action Plan and building equitable and prosperous community. We also work with the scaling climate action and sharing best practices through high impact sectors. A lot of work has been done by C40. Seneca is going to just share with us what they've done. And we will also hear from our very own William Apondo, who we work with in Nairobi to develop the first high-resolution emissions inventory that is being developed for Nairobi City. And the methodology really heavily borrows from what Dr. Ajay has shared in the previous section. So we've had more of an experience sharing between what the team in India has done in Kenya through the Clean Air Catalyst project, which George and William are going to shed light on. And then we have 3 Latin American cities who will also share the experience during this discussion. We know that we have José Sandoval, the Sustainability and Climate Change Technical Manager for the Institutes of Planning and Development Management for the Guadalajara Metropolitan area, who will provide us the context for the area's Integrated Emissions Inventory. It's already active, it's already in place. So we'll hear how they develop theirs. And also we have Patricia Comacho, who is responsible for planning and updating the air pollutant emissions inventory for Mexican City. She'll also give us an overview of their work. How did they develop? Are they updating the emissions inventory? We also have Edison Ortiz from the District Secretariat of Environment from Bogota, who will also share the city's experience with the emissions inventory. And last but not least, we have Muthee Naido, the research scientist at the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, CSR. And he also sits at the Global Emissions Initiative as a co-chair of the African Working Group. So much going on developing of emissions inventories that are fit for the African context. So Muthee will also share on that, and he will share his experience with using emissions inventory for air quality modeling and his work in the Southern African region. So without wasting so much time, the floor is yours, Dr. Moneki.
Thank you, Christine. I think I have to mention that this is a topic that is very close to my heart. So I do have enough questions to keep us discussing these for the next 2 weeks. And I think I'll go straight to a quick question to Seneca. And I'd like to know why C40 cities considers emission inventory as an important tool in air quality management within the cities that are members of C40.
Thank you for the question, George. So firstly, C40 member cities are required to update their greenhouse gas emission inventories every 5 years to comply with internal leadership standards. So integrated emission inventories are actually a crucial link to C40's leadership standards, in that instead of cities just updating their GHG inventories, they have the opportunity to identify and address the top sources of air pollution while also building the case for climate relevant emission reductions. So we are actively looking to better support cities in using their GHG inventory updates to integrate air quality as well for better planning for health outcomes. So we see particular importance in developing integrated inventories in cities where air quality is a primary concern and where maybe leaders may be more hesitant to take action on a climate mitigation basis. We also see integrated inventories as fundamental to mainstreaming air quality across city governments, different agencies and functions. And this is something that's been emphasized in a framework that we recently developed and published called Clean Air, Healthy Planet, which is a framework for integrating air quality management and climate action planning. So this framework is basically a guide that provides a step-by-step process for cities to integrate air quality and health considerations into their climate action plans. So in short, that's why we see integrated emission inventories as an important tool for cities.
Thank you very much for that. I feel tempted to ask how many cities within your network use emission inventories, both air pollution and maybe climate, to support air quality management, or maybe a rough number.
Sure. So we have 96 cities, member cities, through C40's flagship climate action planning program. I think it was, I might be mistaken here, but I think it was 86 cities that had to develop climate action plans. And as part of that, they had to develop GHG emission inventories. We launched a pilot program in 2019 called CanAIRy, which was basically piggybacking off the climate action planning program, where we had 7 pilot cities that we worked with and help them integrate air quality and health considerations of their specific climate actions or strategies that were stated in their climate action plans. We help them integrate air quality and health outcomes into their climate action plans. So at this stage, we have many cities that have just GHG emission inventories and 7 pilot cities that have a sort of lower level integrated inventory for the purposes of our CanAIRy program.
Excellent, many thanks. I think that indicates the work is really cut out for those people who support the emission inventories for these cities. Really thank you for those quick responses. Now we move to the next panelist, William Apondo, who is the air quality analyst for WRI Africa. And William, I want you to please just describe why emission inventories for Nairobi is being developed and some of the strategies you're using to make sure that the data you collect is useful to the city. William, please.
Thanks, George, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you, George, for this. So Nairobi, like most sub-Saharan African cities, faces immense challenges from poor air quality. So amidst these challenges, it's very critical to respond to some of these growing environmental concerns through various actions that is needed to abate some of these challenges. So and to this, despite having the 2014 air quality regulation that is national, and also the current air quality, the bill that is soon transition to the policy, it's important then that the Nairobi City County, the government, you said, agreed to come up with an integrated high resolution emissions inventory to develop for the city of Nairobi. So this in itself will go a long way into helping the city to understand the various sources of air pollution. I've also looked at how they can prioritize on also defining some of these objectives for air pollution management. So in the process, we are currently looking at the bottom-up approach for the emission inventory, where we, unlike the top-down approach, which is sort of generalized, the bottom-up approach sort of looks at the region of interest, for example, the cities, that is divided into various wards and the sub-counties, and then we identify the priority areas of interest, which is the various sectors that we are currently collecting data, which is the household, the industries, transport, eateries, and then also waste burning. So from this, we are going to develop information from each sector and then use to estimate emissions for each sector. So it's very critical that we pay attention for how we're going to collect this data. So because for the city, unlike like most of the cities, we need improvement in air quality for the city of Nairobi. Because most African cities face this challenge, it's important for this which will lead to an important policy development. So an emission inventory for the city of Nairobi is very fundamental because we need effective policies that is going to drive emissions reductions, as well as looking at the various regulations, how they work. And of course, it can also help us to set ambitious targets for emissions reduction. So in the long run, also, this also helps in the climate change mitigation. Of course, we have to consider that as a factor. Of course, if this is sustainable, of course, yes, it has to be sustainable. So that also has to be factored in why we're developing this. Of course, the valuable data that we get from emission inventory being high resolution and collecting from various sectors across the city is very important for sustainable development for the city, of course, because we have to integrate this into the CIDP for the city and also help us how we can plan in the future, and also identify areas of inefficiency and various opportunities when we develop in this, and looking at the gaps and how we can capitalize on this. Of course, from WRI, of course, while we are developing this as part of this, we're also gaining from the capacity building, because as fast emission inventory being developed, we are also gaining much in terms of how we're developing this, the methodology. Of course, we're building local knowledge and the skills from data collection, of course, and analysis, and of course, and the monitoring aspect. So this is also very critical. And of course, having an emission inventory for the city will also help us combined with other cities, like for example, what it has been highlighted from C40 cities. We are strengthening our database and also strengthening our case for support when we want to approach other important issues, like for example, financing, and of course, for international commitments. So briefly, George, this is what I would like to highlight in terms of why we're building the emission inventory for the city. And we need to make sure that this data for us, which we're building for the inventory, is of great value. So in the process of building the emission inventory, it's important to, of course, identify and evaluate all data sources that we use for and emission inventory for the secondary data, and of course, primary data collection that supplements the secondary data. If the data is existing from the national or statistical organizations and other official collections where it's available. So first of all, identify, evaluate, and document this data is a common practice that is very, very important, of course. And the second thing that we have to make sure that this data is very credible is it's making use of best national expertise that we have, like for example, from the Nairobi Air Quality Working Group. This in itself helps us to minimize issues such as duplication of efforts, to minimize this and also increase the efficiency of data collection. So when we focus on this, it helps us much into actually using this data. Of course, we have to focus on the data needed for improvement of estimates, looking at the different categories. And of course, the detailed data collection also takes into account certain areas which Dr. Aje highlighted before, which is uncertainty. So of course, uncertainty is an integral part of data collection, and of course, that is some of the challenges we can look at, of course. So we have to factor this in and seeing how best we can negate this. Of course, we have to establish agreements with data suppliers and look at the data, take the data through QA and QC. And of course, we look at if this is consistent, is this continuing and close. And emissions data are not static, and they're subject to review and update every other year. So this also is something that we have to consider. And of course, some of the things that we're doing is up-to-date documentation of the data collection activities. Of course, and the decisions and the data sources that we're coming up with. Of course, how we archive this data is also very critical, because in the long run, we'll need to use this data for other things as well. Because as it is, you're only focusing on 5 sectors, and when you're building a complete emission inventory, you can go to as many sources as possible. For the city, certain areas give priority and takes precedence for other sectors. And of course, the last part is now making sure that we have a system for continuous improvement for the data that you're collecting. Is this data being gathered procedurally? Is it iterative? And can it improve? And of course, we have to review this data collection every now and then, of course, and the methodology, and on a regular basis, how to guide it progressively and efficiently, looking at the emission inventory. And of course, the last thing is that we have to put in place essential data collection activities. Of course, prioritizing on your resources, proper planning, looking at how you can implement, and of course, documentation. So all this will lead to continuous improvements of our data sets, as well as looking at how this data collection is concerned. So I think that's what I can highlight for this part, George. Thank you.
Thank you, William. And now let's go to one of the Latin American cities and have an understanding on how this is being applied at city level. And the next question, I'm dedicating it to Jose Salvador. And please, I would like to know about your integrated emission inventories, and actually why you define it as a participatory emission inventory, and also I'll be keen to know who participated in putting these together.
Thank you so much, George, and greetings to everyone. Thank you so much to WRI for inviting me. It's a pleasure to see all of my colleagues from C4T too. Well, the metropolitan area of Guadalajara in the state of Jalisco in the country of Mexico has a very recent experience where we just created an integrated inventory where we were able to identify 8 pollutants and 8 greenhouse gases. And I just want to highlight that this inventory, it's the first integrated inventory at a metropolitan level that was developed through our governance of metropolitan coordination, where we are involving different stakeholders from a state level, federal level, municipal level. So this integrated inventory is a tool where the results are at a metropolitan level and they are disaggregated for each one of the different municipalities that make up our city. So the main goal of this inventory, besides, of course, meeting the standards of climate leadership from the C40 because Guadalajara and our municipality is part of the network of C40 cities. And that's why we decided to implement these climate actions, these joint climate actions, as well as in terms of air quality. So our inventory is participatory because from the creation of this project, we identified 4 key components of the process and different stakeholders joined in. The first component for this participatory process was the citizens, because we made them a part by giving them surveys to fill in and interviewing them. And as a result of that experience, we were able to estimate information together with Semarnat, which is the federal entity in our country that oversees anything that's related to climate. The second component was skill building, specifically for public officials, both municipal as well as state level. We delivered 6 different modules of trainings with over 40 hours of training, and we were able to train 25 public officials in this subject matter. The third component was participation and engagement events that we organized. So we held 12 public seminaries where we had the involvement of the government, the academia, students, and youth. And we also organized a forum on joint actions with technical specialists and public officials to improve air quality and to reduce the effects of climate change under a more integrated vision. And lastly, the fourth and last component of our inventory was interinstitutional collaboration. We collaborated with federal authorities of the environment and with the state secretary as well, the Secretary of the Environment, so that we would integrate data that they already have, that they generate, as well as to get an external feedback or review from a third party who would help us to validate the estimation and the calculation processes that we implemented. So these are the 4 elements that make our instrument participatory, these 4 components that I spoke about. And currently, we're also seeking to update our integrated inventory through this unified approach, of course, that allows us not to duplicate efforts, but rather have a true integrated vision of climate change and air quality.
Thank you so much, Jose. I think this is actually why we find this community of practice quite useful, because we can learn from other cities how they are kind of approaching some of these challenges in an innovative way. So I will never ask again why it was participatory. I think the answer was conclusive, and thank you for that. Now, I want to ask a question now to Patricia, because one of the major gaps in developing emission inventories within cities, its relevance over time. The data changes, the numbers changes, and what are some of the gaps that you have noted in your work around emission inventories? And what are some of the additional tools that you think are needed to provide systematically, continuously building on the sustainability of these emission inventories and also their relevance in managing air quality in cities? Sorry, it's a very long question. If you want me to repeat again, you can let me know. But to you, Patricia.
Good morning to everyone, and thank you to WRI for inviting me. Mexico City, yes, we carry out inventories in an integrated way, both toxic components, greenhouse gases, pollutants, for more than 10 years. And the advantage of doing them in an integrated way is that we can see the benefits of implementing an action in terms of air quality and then seeing that impact too on climate change, so on both aspects. As of 2006, we update inventories every 2 years, and of course that it's a big challenge to get the data, to process the data, to analyze data, because we estimate both Mexico City plus the 59 municipalities of the neighboring states. So we must have a very strong and broad coordination with both the local authorities as well as the federal or state level authorities, because we do not develop or create and gather all of the data just us. We need to take it from other areas. So when we talk about gaps, I think that the gap is that data in the different offices is not standardized. Sometimes we're using a database and then the next year we get a different format of a database. We have tried to systematize the estimation and calculation processes, but it's not possible always, because this will also relies very much on the perspective of the technicians. In the case of industrial sources, for example, it's difficult because you need to know what type of process, what type of fuel, what standards they're using to control equipments, to the combustion equipment. So it is very difficult to systematize. We work with it's a system for calculating inventories, which was developed recently in Barcelona. And we have just begun using it. We're just testing it and see if it works and finding out what can be useful for us. So any digital data which is standardized is the kind of data that we can actually use for this kind of systems. And something that I'd like to mention, I'm not sure whether this was part of the question or not, but I'd like to mention it anyways, because I think that the fact that we do these inventories in an integrated way is essential. They are the basis for our air quality and climate action programs. In the Secretary of Environment in Mexico City, air quality is one area and climate change is a different area. They're separate, but we estimate the inventories for both categories and for both offices. And this has been a huge advantage. Another advantage is that we have a team that has lasted throughout time. Of course, there has been changes, but the heads of our teams remain, and they are the ones who allow the coordination for calculation of the inventory. And I think that that's another gap that happens in other cities and other states, that the teams in charge of calculating emissions, they change constantly. So you train someone and then they go back and then they go away and then someone new comes in and you need to train them again. And we, well, should try to strive for having staff that remains for longer. Another big advantage of having integrated inventories is that the assessments can be done in a coordinated way. You can see the benefit of both air quality and climate change. For the first time, we are including climate change in the report of air quality, and we're documenting how climate change has an impact on air quality, plus there being a carbon penalty. Now we have a penalty for ozone. So we have seen that between 2 to 12 parts per million of ozone comes from the impact of climate change. So if we do not do anything about climate change, we won't be able to see any benefits when it comes to air quality. I hope that I answered all of the questions. Am I missing any?
Oh, that was actually excellent. Really appreciate. I like the fact that you brought that link between the need to integrate emission inventories for climate and air quality. In fact, when you did that, I had a question here for you to share some example of actions that was stimulated from that integration. And you just did about the ozone. So really, thank you for reading my mind and for really having a great conversation. I want to quickly now jump quickly to, yeah, thank you, to Edison and really discuss more about how these emission inventories are being used at city level to inform policy and action. I think the previous speakers have kind of alluded to that, but I'd like to know exactly what is in Bogota experience, how are these emission inventories being used to influence both policy, regulations, and also air quality actions?
Well, at the beginning, emission inventories were adopted with a top-down methodology in 2018. And then based on that first attempt, we created the first plan for depolluting the air in the city. So as a result of that experience, the district, as we call it, or the city, was able to understand that emission inventories allow us to identify the most relevant sources where strategies need to be applied in order to reduce emissions. And since this was so important, we were able to fine-tune methodologies throughout time, and we were able to clearly identify the sources to know where the emissions came from. And by doing that, we were able to prioritize some areas that needed to be depolluted or decontaminated first. Currently, thanks to some internal work that we did with my team, the team of atmospheric modeling, and together with another group from the Secretary or the Ministry of the Environment in Bogota, we created a high-resolution criteria pollutants integrated inventory. And this way, we were able to create specific plans for depollution plans, especially in the areas that cause more and larger emissions. So through these inventories, these high-resolution inventories, we can focus on more specific measures for depolluting the city. Now, we have challenges that anyone who gathers data or anyone who creates inventories face, which is getting that data. Fortunately, since we've been doing this for a long while, the secretary had been working on this, well, we were able to systematize data, and the Secretary of the Environment of Bogota became the owner of the environmental data of the city, which we use to calculate inventories. We have systematized the data of fixed industrial sources. We're at the moment working on systematizing mobile sources, and we work with the owners of data of other areas, such as the Secretary of Transportation. And just as the case of Mexico City, there is another group which is separate that calculates greenhouse gas emissions. And currently, with a new administration, we have approached for the first time so that we can integrate both of our inventories, because we have understood that air quality policies can also focus on climate change and the other way around. And we have strengthened our inventories every year. We estimate this year, we're estimating for 2022. And besides the creation of policies, which is of course essential, but also being able to quickly estimate pollutants is very significant input for our air quality models we implement, which are also very robust. So due to how important modeling is, we are able to even estimate chemical species for these inventories. And with the emission model that we have developed, we have validated against the air quality models that we use, and we have been able to realize that it very accurately reflects the dynamics of the city. Now, about future challenges, well, integrating with climate change methodology so that we can have an actual integrated inventory with greenhouse gases, and also to coordinate efforts with environmental entities or agencies around Bogota, so that we can have a more detailed inventory at a regional level, so that we can then improve our systems for forecasting air quality. I hope that I was able to answer the question, George, and well, to all of the participants.
Yeah, thank you, Edison. That was really useful to see the linkages also of the steps after emission inventories to develop pollution reduction plans, and now implementing those. I think maybe next year we'll discuss how are those plans moving along. That was really exciting, and thank you so much. So now we go to Bogesh Naido, who is a researcher in South Africa. And I wanted to ask a question that is relevant to the research and what we are discussing here. And based on your experience on air quality modeling, please share with you your biggest challenge in developing Africa-specific emission inventories. And while you're at it, also mention, I know you have some plans to kind of develop Africa-wide emission factors. You can also mention about that and some of the work that you want to do for that. Please, Mogesh.
Yes, thanks. Thanks for that, and thanks for this opportunity to talk. Yeah, so challenges, I mean, challenges abound. In terms of air quality modeling, you know, one of the biggest challenges, and Dr. Ajay mentioned it as well, was the industrial emissions. Now, technically, you know, they should be quite easy to estimate. You know what's going in, you should know what's coming out, you know, the processes. The problem is actually accessing that data. Different countries have different ways to access it, different repositories, different ideas on confidentiality. So for some countries, you know, it's baked into legislation where you shall release this information to the public. In other countries, not so much. I guess for developing countries, it's much more harder. We do rely a lot on these industrial facilities to drive the economy. So it's not a really straightforward approach. There's a conversation to be had there. And I think the conversation is moving forward in terms of, and this really comes from the climate sector as well, you know, the carbon emissions. It really drives it towards a kind of collaborative approach to development in these countries. It's not beneficial for people to just say, well, we should stop doing this and this. We should say, well, what is the alternative to this? You know, and kind of play ball with these industries, get them to change their processes. But in terms of modeling specifically, you know, besides the emission amounts that we are looking at from these industries, you need to keep in mind that we also need other information, such as stack parameters, the process information for proper speciation of the VOCs and PM2.5 to drive the chemistry models. You see, the stack parameters are something many global models do not include. And as a result, the industrial emissions are grouped into either what you call them a high or a low source in terms of where they are actually emitting into the model layers. And then, of course, this leads to some biases. For example, if you're looking at the power sector, you get a 200 megawatt coal-fired power station versus a 3,000 megawatt. And they are both within the energy sector, so they are treated as a one source sector, but one may emit from a 70-meter stack while the other is coming at, you know, emitting from a 300-meter stack. And at very different velocities, for example. So the dispersion from those two stacks are very different. On a global scale, you know, it's understandable this is not an easy thing to capture. So in the global models, you kind of get everything being emitted into one layer. But it does impact model performance greatly. And we've seen this, we've done comparisons with our local monitoring stations versus the global models versus what we are putting into our models at a very, very fine regional scale. And, you know, the difference is there. But the similar is true for the temporal aspect. These industrial sources do not emit continuously as one would assume. So there's often shutdowns, there's breakdowns, and those need to actually be accounted for. And once again, we've seen that these impact model performance. So it's something that, on the industrial sources, we really got to get a handle on, and it's not necessarily a straightforward process. But then you mentioned the work in Africa. So this is as part of the Gaia African Working Group. So that's, for everyone that doesn't know, that's the Global Emissions Initiative. It's really a global initiative, but there is specifically an African working group. There are other working groups for Asia, for South America, for Europe. And in terms of that, let me just say that one of the largest challenges we've had was identifying these African-specific emission inventory developers to cover Africa, and that's for each country, because we feel that it's really beneficial to have a representative within each country, because the data that's necessary for these emission inventories are often set within country official departments or universities. It's not necessarily publicly accessible, but they're probably willing to share it. So we need these country reps. We've come a long way since the beginning of the African Working Group, but we had our first meeting in January 2022. We had 44 attendees. Much was discussed, and actually these country-specific PIs were identified. But there's still gaps remaining, and especially for the Southern and Eastern African countries. There's around 54 countries in Africa, so it's not really easy to identify a PI for each and every country, but we've made strides on that. And in moving forward, and this is coming now from the that's my African Working Group hat on. It's not really a good idea to have two groups working on the same thing. So, moving forward, we can probably get WRI to join the Gaia African Working Group so we can work together as a central focal point on this, because as you mentioned, there are some initiatives going on. There's two of them, and they will be discussed in an upcoming September meeting. So the two works will be one by Sekou Keita, and he's dealing with an updated regional emissions inventory for GHG and air pollutants for all anthropogenic sources in Africa. And that's basically a refinement on what has already been done by Sekou. And that will be presented at the September workshop. But there's another one on these methane super emitters. And these are generally from oil and gas operations in 7 African countries. And that's going to be involving a lot of satellite work, but then also we need to touch base with these 7 African countries. And as I mentioned, we need these local players into what is going on in the ground. And those will be presented at this September workshop. And then, of course, there's the annual GEA conference, and that's going to happen in Belgium at the end of June, I think it is. Yeah.
Thanks, Mugesh. I think you brought up some very serious issues that also I think Ajay in his presentation did mention industrial emissions being one of the major challenges. And I think after this, we are going to connect offline. We also do have the Nairobi Air Quality Working Group that will be very keen to connect with you while developing the emissions inventories for Nairobi. I wanted to ask a quick question to Patricia on the participatory emissions inventories. I just want to understand, did the participatory approach in developing these help or enhance its usability in informing air quality? Just a quick final question.
Yes, well, it's essential for us that all of the different agencies, that anyone who is involved, all of the stakeholders have a say or have a commitment, responsibility, ownership, because it makes it easier to share data, and it's very useful if we share data. Of course, that we are open to the public. We always say what our sources are, and this makes inventories more transparent and trackable, and it's easier to use for public policies, that they're backed up, that they have, well, the data, where it comes from, and that people are always quoted. The agencies also like that. So for us, it's essential that all of the different stakeholders are involved, of course.
Patricia, for that. And finally, I think we have come to the end of the discussion. And I have to say thank you so much to the really able panel. I wish we had half a day or a full day to really discuss this. Really, thank you for sharing some of the information, and we really appreciate it as the air quality practitioners from the Global South.
Thank you, George. Such an insightful discussion, such great points raised, and I am very sure we are going to have follow-on conversation on what each and every one of us is doing in terms of developing emission inventories for Africa. It's a tool that is not only important but necessary at this time in this region, and also what is happening in Latin America. So we have reached the end of this meeting and the second stage. I can only hope you have learned as much as I have. What I have been able to pick up from these committees of practice is more than I could learn in any particular class. In terms of just what is actually happening on the ground and what are the challenges that have already been done. I will now, when facing air quality management, I will do it at more of an advantage. I think I have an advantage to how I can approach some of these issues, especially coming from the Global South. All right, thank you so much. I would want to just finish this by just saying that there is no power for change than a community that has discovered what it cares about. And we care about air quality. So individual efforts are more than just, they would go a long way, but keeping that community intact and keeping us connected is what we can drive major changes in terms of what we all care about and what we hear about. So let us not only create a community, but also socialize within our platforms and make sure that the lessons that we learn come in handy in making changes and in driving uptake of actions in terms of air quality. So from the east to the west, I would like to say good night, good evening, good afternoon. Have a great day, everyone.